I'm very thankful that you all are willing to let somebody from South Carolina join this North Carolina forum. And I live in Pawleys Island. Have any of you ever visited our area? Beautiful place to vacation. I would put our beaches up against some of your beaches. I think we've got some pretty gorgeous beaches in South Carolina, which is why I moved there. So, yeah, let's just sort of name it right from the beginning. I used to be one of the bad guys, and I saw the light. And I think it's very interesting, some of the research done on working offshore points to the numbers of women that have started working offshore since I started in the late 70s. Has actually led, they believe, to an increase in safety and cleanliness on oil rigs. I can attest to how nasty it was when the first woman was out there. So I'm here to tell you about that long-term impact, and it's great that several people have teed up this conversation, because what we're finding in South Carolina in our volunteer organization, what we call SOTA POP, Stop Offshore Drilling, by the way, we say in the Atlantic, not just South Carolina. Stop offshore drilling in the Atlantic is that it's important for people to understand what's the impact of offshore drilling from the same kind of time frame that oil and gas companies look at this. So they're looking at a 40 to 50 year timeline. Port Fourchon started 40 to 50 years, actually 50 years ago in its development, as Mr. Fritchie just showed you. And it's important for us to understand this long-term impact, because that's what the game is that we are now part of. So while it's very important to be able to fight this fight all along the way, sometimes you can get the attention of people when you show them the legacy that they are going to be leaving behind. So I'm going to take you through, this is the beach by my house. This is how I imagine it looking, even though I know 50 miles out I will not see a rig. I do know that the impact of that rig will at some point show up on my beach, which right now has never had a tar ball or a bit of oil on it in its history. So this is not working. So I want to show you where I started in the oil business. In 1978, I was the first company man. That's the rig supervisor. That's the person in charge of everything that goes on the rig. In the Deepwater Horizon fiasco, disaster, whatever you want to call it, several mistakes were made by the company man, by the person who was calling the shots on the rig, and that led to a chain of reactions that caused the rig to have the catastrophic blowout that it did. So as you hear from oil companies about new technology and about how much safer the oil business is, keep in mind that there's still somebody calling the shots out there, and that's a human being who is known to make errors. So what I'm going to tell you about today is the process that happens after seismic, after the leasing, which is where we've been tending to focus our conversation so far. And we're all very familiar with this diagram. I'm going to be talking about what happens in exploration, in development, and in production. So these extra parts that perhaps those of you who have been focusing on this diagram and your understanding will look a little bit farther out. This is the roughly the 15-year timeline that comes after lease sale. So there are 4 key steps or 4 key stages. The first, as Ms. Orr said, is exploration drilling, and a great question after you get that seismic information. Do you know what you have? And the answer is no, you don't know until you drill a well. So exploration is the first key step. And then if you see something out of those first couple of wells that looks like it has some potential, but you still don't know if it's economically recoverable or not, you'll do what's called delineation drilling, and I'll take you through each of these steps. Delineation drilling allows you to scope the size of the reservoir that you're tapping into and determine, again, whether or not there's economic viability to actually go further and produce from that reservoir. The next step around development is the design work that it takes to create a field and to be able to bring the field production, whether it's oil or gas or some combination, and of course the associated water that comes with it, onshore. And then production is the design and development of all the facilities that will take the production to the consumer. So that's the last step we'll talk about. So to begin with, drilling and production happens differently depending on the water depth. So it's been really interesting and helpful this morning for those of you who are trying to put all the pieces together who've never lived this before, to think about the different water depths that we've been talking about. Much of what is expected to be produced offshore, in fact, that same API Quest report says 70% of what their estimate is going to be in deep water. Deep water is, depending on who's defining it, 500 to 1,000 feet and deeper. And it was also earlier cited that the deepest well that has been drilled has been in roughly 10,000 feet of water. So our coastline goes out off South Carolina, goes out to 16,000 feet water depth. So they're looking at areas in the seismic work that is in record depths. Different types of water depth require different rigs. The shallower rigs are the ones shown obviously to the left there. The deeper rigs really are things like drill ships and semi-submersible rigs. That's what I expect we'll be seeing here, drill ships and semi-submersible rigs. See, we highlight South Carolina when we're talking about South Carolina. But you've seen many pictures similar to this today that gives you a sense of what that coastline looks like. It is the Outer Continental Shelf where the most interest is, that ridge up past where it says Charleston Bond, that ridge that goes all along and comes closest to y'all around Cape Hatteras. 328 feet to over 16,000 feet of water depth is what we're talking about. And most likely, especially for exploration, they'll bring a drill ship or so in here. By the way, rigs and drill ships are not built where you drill. They're built in places like Norway, the Gulf of Mexico, China, and they're brought around the world. You probably have seen lots of pictures of the rig that's headed to the Arctic when it was in the port in Seattle. That rig was not built in Seattle. It was, I believe that rig was built in the Gulf. So it's important to understand that deep water drilling is the most dangerous drilling of all. So if you think for a minute about the fact that we're going to have deep water drilling here, and you think back on the Deepwater Horizon, one of the major failures for the Deepwater Horizon was the blowout preventers. So blowout preventers are the equipment that stops a well from blowing out. You take, if you're drilling into a high pressure area of gas or something that's uncontained, that's unexpected, especially in an exploration well, you rely on this set of equipment. In shallower water, the blowout preventers are located on the rig, on the platform. And if something goes wrong, like a gauge or a hydraulic line or something's not working, you can actually get your hands on it and change it out. And that happened to me once in one of the wells I was drilling. We had a bad gauge, so we had to change that out. When you're drilling offshore, the blowout preventers are right there on the ocean floor. And when you're talking about getting down to 10,000 feet to be able to fix something on a blowout preventer, of course that's not easy to do. This is the ocean floor flange of where the blowout preventers were on the Deepwater Horizon. So that's what it looks like when the blowout preventers are blown off. So you've seen this picture, or some versions of it, many times today also. I think it's important to get in your heads, if you don't already have this, that the Deepwater Horizon was located 45 miles offshore the coast of Louisiana in 5,000 feet of water. The Manio prospect is in approximately 45 miles offshore in approximately 4,000 feet of water. So your most risky possibility is positioned exactly like the Deepwater Horizon was. So as I think, again, was well said by Mazur, it's not, you don't know what's there until you drill. And there was a conversation this morning about gas, and there have been several allusions and I've heard a lot of this in South Carolina, that what's out there for us to tap into is wonderful, safe natural gas, the kind of natural gas that comes into our homes and heats our homes. And the American Gas Association's always done a good job of helping us think of gas as safe. Well, it's not safe, and we have both oil and gas, we know, offshore. So don't think only about gas, but really keep in mind that when oil and gas are found together, you have to produce the oil first, because when you produce the oil, the gas expands and helps drive the oil out of the well. So it's very important to keep in mind when oil and gas are present, the oil has to come out of the reservoir first. Then delineation drilling. This is just a really cool looking picture, but it's maybe a little hard for you to see. The red area in two different layers is a schematic, or this a picture of a reservoir. The point is that usually when you're drilling an exploratory well, you're drilling a single well, you're capturing information about where there are possible producing horizons, and then you have to determine really how large an area there is and whether or not there's enough to recover and make it economically viable. As Mr. Fritchie just said, offshore rigs run about $1 million a day. So you want to make sure if you're going to develop a platform, if you're going to put a platform in place, that you've got significant reserves to be able to cover that cost. So that is, delineation drilling is done to be able to determine just how big the reservoir is. But what about getting into shore? The thing that's interesting to me is I talk to people in South Carolina about this. Maybe you all are more educated, so it's not as much of a surprise to you. But when we're talking about offshore drilling, we're not going to go out, we're not talking about going out and punching a couple of holes in the ground in the ocean, and somehow magically that's all going to turn into gasoline, jet fuel, and natural gas. What happens is that it's either processed on the ocean floor. So these are individual wellheads. So in this sample, for example, or in this picture, for example, there are 7 wellheads, and they come into a central processing unit on the ocean floor where water separated from the oil and gas, and water may be re-injected right there into the substrata. And then it comes into a set of pipelines. It might come up into what's called an FPSO, a floating production, storage, and offloading barge or ship. An FPSO can then take it into another tanker where it would go to a refinery directly, or it can go through a pipeline up into onshore processing facilities. So another way to look at it, you've got a rig or an FPSO in the ocean bringing those the streams of oil and gas and water up onshore for some separation and processing, and then goes into a refinery or other gas production, or in the case of natural gas, it could go into an LNG, liquefied natural gas plant. This is a picture of a real system that's being developed right now off the coast of Australia, off the coast of Darwin. Anybody ever been to Darwin, Australia? Yeah, great. Pretty remote place, but all about oil, right? What they're doing here is producing, again, this is a design that's currently being built, producing wells, doing on ocean, the subsea separation, on the ocean floor separation, bringing it up to FPSOs and taking the condensate from the oil and gas stream off to a refinery, and then they're taking the gas via pipeline into an onshore LNG plant. I think you saw some pictures this morning of what an LNG tanker looks like. Those are like bombs on a ship. It's highly compressed. It's cryogenically kept cold. It's very dangerous operation, LNG. So the thing to keep in mind is that, and this is what we are discussing a lot in my neck of the woods, the town of Georgetown, just south of us. What the advocates in our area are saying is Georgetown would make a great place for all the onshore infrastructure that's going to be required for offshore drilling. So I know y'all are thinking about Moorhead and Norfolk and other places up here more. Yes. other places in North Carolina. What I'm trying to bring to people's attention is in the Georgetown could end up looking like Port Fourchon, which you've now seen previews of what I'm about to show you. So this is some more pictures of Port Fourchon. It's been around over 50 years. It's developed over 1,300 acres, and they're expanding to 4,000 acres. When I worked offshore, I worked out of Port Fourchon, I worked out of Venice, which is over here, I worked out of Morgan City, and all of South Louisiana, if you didn't get Mr. Fritchie's presentation, is marshland. There are no beaches. It's not a vacation destination like the North Carolina and South Carolina coastlines. So to bring all this on shore is pretty frightening. One thing that they have in South Carolina, of course, that we have here and nobody's mentioned yet today is hurricanes. So even greater than nor'easters, if a hurricane blows in, it really wreaks havoc around drilling rigs. I had to evacuate rigs for hurricanes in the Gulf of Mexico, and oil companies, because those rigs are so expensive, wait until the last possible minute to evacuate. I can tell you that. And the last person off the rig turns out the lights, except for the safety lights that are left on the rig. It's a very, very hazardous condition. You know what it's like to get yourself off your home or your beach to get into a safe place for a hurricane. Getting a crew of largely men, people off of a drilling rig into safety and to shut down your rig takes at least 24 hours. You usually then are evacuating in high seas, high winds. So this is the path of where Hurricane Katrina and Rita came through the Gulf of Mexico. You can see it pretty well covered most of the production area. These are the paths of Katrina and Rita. There were, when we were all thinking about, oh, those poor folks that have gone into the Superdome and are trying to ride out this storm and be able to move back to their homes at some point, what was going on in the Gulf that nobody was paying attention to or talking about, 9 million gallons of oil were spilled, over 100 platforms were completely destroyed, over 450 seafloor pipeline breaks. There was a tremendous amount of damage in the Gulf, a lot of oil, a lot of damage that came on shore. And then, of course, barges and tankers that ran over some of the broken off platforms and so forth. So on a good day, Port Fourchon looks like that from the air. After a hurricane, that's what Port Fourchon looked like. So that's another thing to consider is all this onshore infrastructure is also subject to the hurricanes that we experience. This just gives you an idea of all the pipeline networks and so forth that go along with offshore development. And I think it's really important to keep in mind that every U.S. coast where we've ever drilled has experienced a cataclysmic, very expensive spill of some sort or other. We're not talking just about blowouts like the Deepwater Horizon or the Valdez. These kinds of things happen all the time, plus all the transportation associated pipeline breaks. This is a common occurrence, not a rare occurrence. So the first presentation I gave in our area to help educate people about what was coming by supporting offshore oil and gas was March 23rd. Since March 23rd, this is just some of the highlights of things that have occurred, spills that have caused damage in our country as a result of offshore oil and gas. So the rig explosion in the Mexican part of the Gulf of Mexico, 4 men were killed. Of course, we've had several trains that have exploded, hauling crude from North Dakota to the East Coast. Porpoise, there was a lightning striking an oil tank. This is, again, not rare, causing a huge explosion. And then, of course, spills in Galveston. Spills in the Gulf Coast happen all the time. And then, of course, we have Santa Barbara. So who lived through the first Santa Barbara? Who remembers the first Santa Barbara spill? What year was that? 1969, right? So these wells were drilled in the 50s and 60s. And that first spill, 1969, got Californians so upset that finally, by 1981, they created a moratorium, no drilling off the coast of California. 1981, there has never been a well drilled off the coast of California since then. What was this spill caused by? A pipeline break. Where did the oil come from that pipeline break? The wells that were drilled in the 50s and 60s. So once an oil company has a lease, as long as they continue to produce a certain amount of oil, they hold that lease for as long as that reservoir, they can get oil and gas out of that reservoir. This is a forever decision. This is not a short-term kind of decision that we have to think about just now. These kinds of opportunities for cleanup, these kinds of messes that are going to come to our coastline are going to be around for our children and our children's children. There also, it's very important to know, there are no key east-west pipelines, and there's a lot of conversation now about the Palmetto pipeline and other pipelines in your state that are coming to our area, coming to an area near you. That's really important to keep track of, because why is it that people are interested, oil companies are interested in the Atlantic? Because they want to export. The bills that just came out of the Senate Subcommittee on Energy have been passed. That bill, Murkowski's bill, contains crude oil export, hasn't been allowed since the 1970s. All of this leads up to, one way or another, the oil companies want it on our coast. Whether there's oil here or not, they will find a way to develop an export location because they've got oil and gas that they need to get to Europe. So, this is our legacy. Thank you for an opportunity to share my thoughts with you. And if you have any questions, I'd be glad to take them now or later.